So today we are going to take you through the committee process. This is from when a legislator introduces a bill all the way to when a bill gets voted out of committee. So we wanted to first start off with kind of a breakdown of what roles are throughout the committee process. This is the roles of the committee staff, policy, and aides. So for committee staff, this is made up of committee clerks, which are partisan, so us, which are from the House Democrats office. There's also Senate clerks. There's also assistant clerks, which are sessionals. They come from the minority caucuses and they help out throughout the committee process. And then we have a committee administrator. Normally those are nonpartisan. There are three between the committees. There's one for appropriations, finance, and also for public health. So when it comes to the committee process, really the committee clerk is responsible for kind of making sure that the process is streamlined. We also have to make sure that we are adhering to deadlines. So for committee clerks, what we have to do is we have to send out information related to the committee. This can entail, sending out the Zoom links, the agenda, the S language, otherwise known as substitute language, public hearing notices, and any other information related to the committee. We also have to, be responsible for taking the roll, or also known as recording committee votes. We also have to take down meeting minutes so the public can access that if they want like a written copy or a written transcript of the committee. Sometimes the assistant clerks do have that responsibility of taking the meeting minutes. And we also are responsible for screening documents, which we will go into further on what screening is and what that entails. For the policy department, they have to prepare public hearing bill summaries for public hearings. These are a breakdown of bills that are normally in plain language. They kind of go by section, and this allows legislators to kind of have a broader understanding of what the bills are in preparation for the public hearing. So if they have questions to ask state agencies or stakeholders, they have this copy in front of them that they can reference. Policy also attends committee meetings, public hearings, and screenings, but that also is contingent upon the chairs, which again, we'll talk about screening later on. They also conduct research on policy topics. So leading up to session, policy will meet with the chairs to talk about, what priorities they are looking for, and then kind of look into those topics. And normally, sometimes when a bigger bill is being brought out, they will help the chair out. For example, like if we are anticipating hours of debate, policy will then kind of help the chairs with any questions that other colleagues may have, colleagues meaning legislators, have during that debate time. And lastly, they assist with member attendance during committee meetings. For aides, otherwise known as CECs, one of the most important things that we ask as clerks for CECs is to make sure that any sort of committee meeting or public hearings be added to the legislator's calendar. That way, as you know, a lot of legislators are on committees, various committees, and it is important for them to have kind of a track of what's happening. So by adding it to their calendar, it ensures that they have the link, the timing, where it's being held, and any other sort of relevant information. And when we're also, voting bills out of committee, sometimes we keep votes open because, as you know, we are aware that committee members are part of various committees, and there may be multiple committee meetings happening throughout the day. So normally kind of letting your legislator know once a clerk reaches out to people that, votes are being held open, that is something that is really key. And also keeping track of legislators' proposed bills. Basically, from the start of session, bills can be morphed into other bills, and it's important to just kind of keep track of where those lead, if it continues on, if it dies, if it gets referred to another committee. Those things are important for legislators as session keeps going on. So this past session that we had was a long session. That is a regular 5-month session of the General Assembly held in every odd number year in the calendar. Legislators at this time can introduce proposed bills on any matters. And again, we'll go into what that means. But going into the next year, we will have a short session. So that is a 3-month session that is held during even number of years. Legislators can only introduce proposed bills restricted to fiscal matters. And if there's any bills outside of that fiscal matter, they will have to go to the committee chair to see if it's appropriate for the committee to raise that bill for them. So one good thing that HDO does is at the beginning of session, we have committee office hours. This allows any House legislator to participate and kind of get into the brain of the House chair and into the kind of to figure out what the committee is planning on doing during session and any potential topics that could be considered. The policy department is also present to answer any questions, and you do not have to be on the committee to attend. Any House Dem legislator can join. It's a great opportunity for legislators to kind of get an understanding of what the committee wants to do and even talk to the chair directly to introduce any sort of bill or raise any sort of topics that they want to be seen kind of move forth during the session.
All right, so we're going to talk about proposed bills now. So what is a proposed bill? Well, a proposed bill is a bill submitted by any legislator to the General Assembly. And the way they do that is through their My Jobs portal on CGA. And aides and staff can submit proposed bills on behalf of a legislator, but you need written approval from that legislator before you submit it. You need to know what it's going to say, and so on and so forth. So in a long session, like Chandra mentioned, it can be any subject. It doesn't matter. And those are the odd number years. And then the even number years are the short session. And it's got to be related to the budget. So those go to the Appropriations Committee or the Finance, Revenue, and Bonding Committee. Legislators generally get about a week to submit proposed bills. And proposed bills are typically just a sentence long. So there's an example on the screen of proposed bill, Senate Bill 5. And if a senator submits a bill, it's a Senate bill. If a representative submits a bill, it's a House bill. And there's a subject line from when you submit a proposed bill. But at the end of the day, the Legislative Commissioner's Office, LCO, determines what committee those bills go to. And that scope or cognizance is determined in our joint rules. So that's one form of a bill. Another form of a bill is a raised bill. And that is when you essentially, on an agenda, it'll say concepts to be raised. And it starts out as just a title. And those titles are usually chosen by LCO. Staff or like a clerk can pick it as well. But me personally, I generally just have our LCO attorneys pick those titles. The language typically comes from activists, lobbyists, years prior bills that didn't make it across the finish line, or new ideas that a legislator can have. In the short session, as I mentioned, since you can only propose bills on certain subjects, legislators and advocates usually find themselves reaching out to the chairs of the committee to ask for them to raise a bill on their behalf. And that's an example on the screen of a lobbyist who reached out to us last year to raise a bill. And you want to just give as much information as possible. If it was a prior bill from years past, you want to maybe attach that bill. And you always want to attach or CC the clerk or the admin in that email so that we know that you sent it to us and that we can add it to our screening log. If you send an email, it's good to follow up with chairs. However, be mindful of how often you follow up with them, obviously. So let's talk about screening meetings. I mentioned a screening log, and that's essentially just an Excel spreadsheet of all of the proposed bills our committee gets, or all of the concepts that we get submitted, and we list out who they're from so that when we have the first screening meeting, we can figure out what bills are going to get hearings, what's feasible. Is this bill supposed to be in our committee or should it be in a different committee? And depending on the size of the committee, you will typically have 3 screening meetings. The first one is before that first committee meeting where you say, okay, here's everything we got. What are we going to do? What are we not going to do? The second is after public hearings, and you get the public input from advocates and lobbyists and the public and legislators and state agencies. And you say, okay, what's ready to be voted on right now? This is good to go. Let's do it now. Or I liked what that person said. We should probably change this. Let's have LCO draft up substitute language. And you kind of get an idea of what's going to happen when. So who can attend screening meetings? Who's typically going to these? Well, it's always the chairs and ranking members, but vice chairs can be invited. The nonpartisan staff are there. So LCO, OLR, OFA, and then partisan staff as well. So your policy analysts, your your caucus attorneys, and then the clerk and administrators as well. Because the role of a clerk and administrators, like I said, we keep track of the screening log and we figure out and we write notes on what needs to be done, what S language needs to happen, are we doing this, so on and so forth. So committee meetings, where are they? Who can go to them? So right now, committee meetings are hybrid. So there has to be an in-person and a virtual option. So in-person would be in the hearing room that we're in right now. And you would find that on the CJ homepage's calendar, which is shown right there. and then it's via Zoom as well. And with committee meetings, those are sent out as calendar invites. So that Zoom link would be put on the legislator's calendar. And on the Zoom link, the only people who should be using that link are typically the legislators and whoever actually receives the invite. If you want to see the committee meeting, you can go in person because, you'll see advocates there and lobbyists and other people, or you can watch it on YouTube on the committee's page or on CTN.
So one of the things I noticed as a committee member is in the hearings, there's often some really important suggestions for improvement on the bill. And I am never sure who is really tracking that and if it's rising to, the final. I mean, we vote on it as a committee if it goes through screening, but like some of those really key suggestions, it could be from an agency or from the public, often from advocates. I'm never sure, not being a chair, if that's included. Now, usually the chair is in there, at least one of the chairs is in there, but often the clerk is there till the bitter end of the hearing at midnight or whatever. And I'm just wondering, how does some of those really key suggestions for improvements or inclusions get translated?
So I can only speak for my own committee. I mean, maybe Chandra and Taylor can chime in as well for like their own experiences, but my chairs both are there to the end and they are taking notes and figuring out, what are the feasible changes. And then I'm also there as well as just like a second line of defense to see what changes are put forward. And then, like I said, in that like next screening meeting, we kind of go over all of the proposed changes and what's good and what's not and what's feasible, et cetera.
One note to add, OLR will typically provide notes after a hearing. So they're tracking it throughout the hearing in real time, any big suggestions that come up or things that need to be flagged with the chairs prior to the next screening.
And to add on that, normally that's shared with the chairs. And for my committee for human services, sometimes we like use that document that OLR provides during screening to kind of see, okay, like where can we improve, what substitute language we can then incorporate to make those changes that were suggested.
I'm just wondering, is there a way for committee members to be informed that and some committees do this through the Democratic caucus, committee caucus right before the meeting. But like I said, after 12-14 hours of testimony, I am never clear on what's been included in what we're voting on next or not.
Yeah, I would just say the best practice would probably just be to ask the chair.
Okay. Like most members don't necessarily, I wouldn't say most, some members don't listen or are present to the entire committee hearing. So
yeah, I would just say, if there's anything that you hear at a hearing that you say, wow, it's a really good idea, I would just say for you to just follow up with the chair and say, hey, I heard this from this testifier. I think this is a really good idea. Like, is this something that's feasible? And just having that conversation with the chair.
Great. Okay, thanks.
It would also be a good practice to loop in the policy analyst for that committee. So it's something that they can look into. They can communicate that with the chairs, look into the feasibility of that potential substitute language or amendment.
Okay. So committee meetings. So these are like the first round of votes that typically happen in committee meetings. There's raising concepts, there's voting to draft proposed bills, and then there's reserving for a subject matter public hearing. So raising concepts is essentially raising bills. So it'll be a list of titles. And when you vote to raise concepts, it then turns that concept into a fully drafted raised bill. So it goes from a title to a several page document that LCO drafts up. Voting to draft is deciding to draft a proposed bill. So you're taking that typical one sentence, say like Senate Bill 5, for example, and you're saying, all right, we're going to draft this bill. And it turns that one pager into 15 pages. And again, that's drafted by LCO. Reserving for a subject matter public hearing is when you decide to have a public hearing on a bill that isn't fully drafted yet. You're having a hearing on a proposed bill. And I've seen that happen most commonly, I feel, with the bigger issues. So I've seen it happen with sports gambling a couple years ago, as well as marijuana, because a lot of people had input on the best way to do this. And what I would imagine, and I'm just making a guess here, is they wanted to get as much input as possible before taking a stab at it themselves so that LCO had a best idea of what they wanted. So if you missed a meeting and you wanted to watch it, or you missed a hearing, all of the meetings and hearings are on the committee's YouTube page, and you would go there by going to the CGA website under the committees, and then you'd pick the committee that you want. And then there's a little red YouTube logo, and when you click that, it takes you right to their YouTube page. It's also, they can be on CTN, ct-n.com, and then they have an on-demand section. CTN doesn't cover every meeting, especially when it's really busy during session, because they only have so many resources. So they kind of have to pick and choose which ones they're going to cover, but you can always find them on the committee's YouTube page.
So as mentioned earlier, one of the roles of a committee clerk is to adhere to the deadlines. Usually with our nonpartisan staff, they help us kind of make sure that the chairs are being mindful of those deadlines as they come up, and they do approach very quickly during session. So to elaborate on what Nate had talked about, one of the first committee bill deadlines is the committee bill deadline. That is essentially the last day for a committee to either have a proposed bill drafted as a committee bill or reserve a proposed bill for a subject matter public hearing. If neither of those actions are taken, then the bill is considered dead unless, the bill is petitioned or it kind of shows up in another form in another bill. Next is a raise bill deadline. These are concepts, so basically a one sentence title essentially, and that is the last day for new bills not based on a proposed bill to be raised for drafting by the committee. And then next is a subject matter public hearing. So like Nate said, those are bills that were reserved for more information. And let's say the chairs of the committee really like the concept of this bill and they want to make it into a full bill, then they would have to take a vote on that before that deadline. And then there is also a committee bill deadline for bills. There is lastly a JF deadline, which is the joint favorable deadline. That is the date by which each committee must report out bills or resolutions for further consideration by other committees or by the full General Assembly. Normally, bills must be voted on by 5 p.m. on the day of the JF deadline in order for that bill to move forward in the process. Rep. Hughes.
Chandra, could you explain the difference between an informational hearing, which we can have outside of session, and a subject matter hearing?
Yeah, so an informational hearing is not related to a bill. Like today with Public Health Committee and the Human Service Committee, we're having an informational forum on access to healthcare for individuals with disabilities. That isn't related to any bill, but usually an information forum can result in a bill being introduced or proposed. So hopefully that might be the intent at the end of this informational forum that we're having later today. But a subject matter public hearing is based off of a bill that has already been introduced.
All right. So now that we've had at least one or two committee meetings, we are in the public hearing process. Why do we have public hearings? This is a mandatory step in the process in order for any bill to be able to be voted on, to be voted out of committee before it can go into the House or the Senate. It is required to have a public hearing. This allows various members to provide input on a particular bill, whether it be agencies who are going to actually be implementing the policy, legislators who may want to provide public testimony on a public platform so they can show constituents, members of the public, if a piece of policy would affect them or they already are experiencing something and why this is important legislation. Also relevant stakeholders, subject matter experts, anybody, organizations, lobbyists, you'll see a lot of those types of people testifying at public hearings. Some committees would prefer legislators maybe not to provide public testimony because a public hearing is really primarily for the public. This is probably my favorite slide in this presentation. So putting public hearings on the legislator's calendar. The difference between a public hearing and a committee meeting is a committee meeting will go out as one calendar invitation to every member on the committee. Because for the time being, I at least don't foresee us returning back to strictly in-person meetings and hearings. They're probably going to remain hybrid for a little while, which means us as clerks and administrators have to set these up as Zoom webinars. So the committee members will receive what is called a panelist link instead of something that's automatically added to your calendar. This comes directly into your email. It needs to be manually added to the calendar because it is unique to every member. And we highly, 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 highly say, please do not share this link, because if I give my link to Chandra and Chandra joins that meeting, she's going to join as Taylor Hyde. And I don't know how to mark attendance. I don't know who the real person is. And it just causes a lot of confusion for us as staff. And some of these hearings, we are managing 500 people, and we can't always track down who the real person is. Sometimes legislators are asking where their link is. It just really stresses the importance of CECs really looking at their legislators' calendar, comparing it to what's on the CGA calendar directly on the website, and making sure that they are lining up with the committees that each legislator has. Another way to do this is through accessing the CM calendar, which is under the My Jobs on CGA. So that way you could see if you're missing anything on your legislator's calendar for any of their committees. But it's a panelist link for public hearings. So this is the bulletin. This is how you're going to figure out how to sign up for a public hearing, any pertinent information, really, if the first hour is going to be reserved for public officials and who is actually considered one. So this is going to be posted 5 days before a public hearing. So anybody has 5 days to sign up if they'd like to testify. And this closes at 3 p.m. the day before the hearing. So we give everybody an ample amount of time to sign up. So just another thing to really pay attention to and make sure you're not missing anything, either for your legislator or if a legislator would like to chime in about something, that is the allotted amount of time that they have to make sure that they sign up for it. So once you click that, you can click that link in the bulletin, which is, I don't know if I mentioned it, and I'm sorry if I didn't, it's found on the CA website. You'll click that link, you'll be able to sign up. It'll bring you to this form here. Legislators should use their CGA email. That way we know to mark you as a public official, and you can be given a priority spot in the speaker order. You will have to separately submit your written testimony, so it isn't all in the same. To submit the testimony, you'll go into the committee section of the website, and there'll be a link to submit public hearing testimony. Yes. Thank you. Not all committees offer priority speaker order spots for legislator, but that information will be found in the bulletin and whether or not the committee is allowing that or not. But the written testimony can be found either under the bill number or the public hearing date on the committee's portion of the website. We ask that anybody who's submitting testimony submit that written testimony the day before. You can submit it throughout and after, but it is probably best practice to submit before. That way members of the committee can look over your written portion while the public hearing is going on. And probably the biggest thing to stress is written testimony is public. So you should highly consider that if you're including any personally identifiable information like your address, phone number, email address. I try to exclude that if I can when publishing testimony, but it's really up to the person submitting it to if they want to share that or not. So the speaker order, this determines the order in which the testifiers will be speaking. And this is done in a randomized way. It isn't done first come, first serve. We do tend to shuffle the list, so to say. This is important because a lot of the times legislators, constituents, anyone testifying, CECs will ask, when can they expect, Representative Walker to be testifying? And it's not really viable for us to be able to determine that. There are a lot of factors at play, an agency could go on for a few hours, and it could be the time it takes to get to number 1 to number 5 could be 3 hours. It's hard for us to tell, which is why it's really important for staff to really be paying attention to what's going on in the meeting to be able to support your legislator on when they can expect to go. But you'll see a speaker. I'll get to a slide. It'll talk about the speaker order number. So you'll be able to tell live.
I have a question. If a constituent is signed up to testify for a public hearing and they can't make the time in which they're supposed to testify, can they swap with someone?
It would depend on the committee, but in my committee, we do not allow that. No, I have seen it. We tried a few different ways this year. If we had like a big bill, usually, the budget's pretty big. So we'll split it up between in-person and remote. And if people were switching their preference, we put them at the bottom of the list. But I think that was really also nuance for this year.
That makes sense. I have a follow-up question.
Yes, ma'am.
If I am a constituent signed up to testify for a public hearing and I don't see my testimony online, why is that?
It is likely that the committee staff has not been able to get to publishing it yet. Again, if it's a really big bill, we could have upwards of 500 people, and that is time intensive to be able to manually upload every single piece of testimony. We do have support staff. We try to stay on top of it, but that is the likely reason.
Can I add something? So oftentimes we have a new system of how to submit written testimony, and there are times where an incorrect bill may be submitted. So sometimes it takes us extra amount of time to kind of make sure that the accurate information is inputted. So there could be an instance where we may have mistakenly, put the wrong bill number, or the wrong bill number was submitted and it got published. So that's just something to keep in mind. But we do go through all the bills to make sure that the accurate testimony is with that bill.
The last thing I just want to note on this slide is the first hour. Usually, I mean, committee by committee, it's a little different. The first hour is reserved for public officials. And after that first hour passes, the chairs will usually alternate between members of the public and the public officials. And that's how you see it go. So being in a public hearing, each speaker is typically given 3 minutes to speak initially. However, if there are any follow-up questions, which are allowed by any member of the committee, this will take longer and it's not timed. So once that question portion begins, it's not timed any longer. The speaker order, so you'll see the beautiful Representative Leeper here. In the bottom left-hand corner of your screen, the committee staff will rename each attendee that joins, the person who is testifying, with their speaker order number. So that's how you'll be able to tell in real time where we're at in the order of the hearing. So as staff will try to rename them, which is another really important reason of why we highly advise not to share links, because if testifiers are sharing links, I've had times where there are 12 people with the same name on there, and I don't know who to allow in to the hearing because I just don't know who the real person is. So it's just really important to pay attention to. We try to manage it during the meeting, but it's a lot to keep up with. The bottom, where am I? Bottom right, you'll see the host would like to promote you to panelists. So about 3 to 5 people before your turn, we promote the attendees to panelists, and you'll see this thing pop up. Only panelists can turn on their camera and their microphone. So you have to accept this invitation in order to testify. If you don't accept it, we pass you. We try to promote you as much as we can, but a lot of times people either aren't just paying attention or they have no idea what this prompt is, but it's the only way that we can allow you to testify is as a panelist. Caucus.
So basically my question was, if that last comment that you made that they have to attend as a panelist in order to speak, does that apply only for the legislators, or is that for those attending, anybody who's going to provide a speech?
Yeah, it's anybody that signed up to testify, whether, because it's all the same panelist link that gets sent. Attendee link. Once you've signed up to testify, it's all the same link, whether you're a member of the public, a state agency, and a legislator. So yeah, in order for them to speak, they have to be a panelist.
One question I had, or one thing I noticed, the number one thing we get like from reps as aides is they always say, oh, well, when I go up to testify during that first hour, can my constituent join me, or can my person from my town join me? And I would say it's a case-by-case basis, but you always ask the clerk or the chair, is that okay? But usually they're going to say, they sometimes can, but they still are held to that 3 minutes. They can't go on. Like, I know the public officials can go on as long as they need to, but the 3 minutes still usually applies, but always you need to ask. And it's like a case by case basis. But
absolutely. Sometimes, and we don't recommend that in my committee. If that constituent is someone that has signed up to testify, that's what we want to see. That's the written testimony that we want to see, not a surprise guest. The record has no way of keeping that. It is highly advised that if your constituent wants to sign up to testify, that they do it the official way rather than come up.
I'd also say that public hearings are transcribed by a third party. So if you go up there with a constituent, it's going to say that you gave your story. Your constituent story is going to come across as your own. So
yeah, I've had times in committee where a school of kids have been brought up, and I'm then scrambling to write down their names because I have to give that to the transcriber. So it can throw off the whole groove when we're already trying to manage a lot in a public hearing. So we would prefer you not do that. And if you are going to do that, please let us know ahead of time and probably get some sort of permission, quote unquote, from the chairs that that's something that they're comfortable with. So caucus. Now the committee meetings are over, hearings are over. We're ready to go into the joint favorable process. Typically before that happens, before either the big meetings or really big controversial bills, committees will hold a caucus when both Republicans and Democrats have private closed doors meetings, and it's extremely, extremely confidential. There are only the committee staff being the partisan clerks and maybe policy and caucus staff are allowed in these. I know there have been times where CECs have popped in because their legislators have asked them to bring them something. And I try in the nicest way to say that, I'm sorry, you can't be here. So please don't take that as me being rude if I'm kicking you out of caucus. It's just not allowed. Yeah. So they're just usually the intention of caucus is the chairs want to get a feel of where the committee members are on a bill. And the best practice would be maybe not to sideline the chairs and where you stand on something and maybe give them a heads up on, I'm not in agreement on this bill. This is why I oppose this. Would it be okay if I throw in this amendment? Those are probably conversations that should occur prior to caucus. But yeah, that's the purpose of caucus. Anything else you guys want to throw in?
Yeah, I would just also add that nonpartisan staff like LCO can come in
Yeah, thank
to like explain a bill.
The other thing I'll say with what you just mentioned, and it's the third bullet about shouldn't wait until caucus. A lot of times members are being informed in caucus about the bill. So there's two sides to that. I mean, if you have information on the bill prior to caucus, that's one thing. But a lot of times, my colleagues don't have any idea until we get to caucus what this bill is, what it does, and that's pretty much where we get our questions answered. We raise our concerns. So I just wanted to put that out there that sometimes caucus is exactly where, a chair, as a former chair, will find out. Your members have a problem with this.
Yeah. No, thank you for bringing that point up. I remember in appropriations last year where it was our deadline. And so we had a very long caucus before that meeting where we went bill by bill to explain to the members of the committee what this was doing, what the intentions of this was, so we could all kind of be on the same page and be equally informed on what was happening. So it's been through the whole process. We've had a public hearing, we've caucused. Now it's final action time. These are the different things that could happen to a bill once they've been added to an agenda. The most common things that we are going to see is a joint favorable or a JF, joint favorable substitute or JFS, or a change of reference. I have only learned in recent years of one occasion where joint unfavorable has occurred, and that came in judiciary. But primarily, you'll see those three things. Joint favorable is when the committee agrees as written, we like this bill, we'd like to vote it out of the committee, we'll send it to the House or Senate. Joint favorable substitute is like, we like this bill, but we have an amendment, and that amendment creates what's called substitute language. And with that substitute language, now we give it our stamp of approval. We'll send it off to the House or Senate. Joint unfavorable, the committee says, we hate this. We agree that we don't like this, and the House and Senate should not vote on it. And same thing, joint unfavorable substitute. Box is motion to defeat the bill in committee. Change of reference is when they send it to a different committee, usually a committee of cognizance that should hear this bill before it is recommended to go to the House or Senate. Joint favorable change of reference, joint favorable substitute change of reference. The last thing I wanted to note is substitute. Once we have that, we tend to it's required to have approval by the chairs before it's sent to the committee. And typically the committee will see that drafted substitute language the night before a meeting. We try to get it to you as soon as possible, but it can require a lot of changes, and just know that LCO is working as hard as they can to get it to you as quickly as possible. So the JF rules, sometimes in committee, both sides of the aisle agree on these bills. And so they will start what's called a consent calendar, which a group of bills can be added on there. And that way they don't have to vote on each bill individually. They can vote on them as a single group of bills. It still requires a roll call vote, just as it would any other bill. And during JF deadlines, I know a lot of legislators are on several committees, and you could be required to be in several committees in one day that need you there to vote on. This is why it's really important that CECs work in tandem with the clerks, because we aren't always able to manage the attendance and rally the troops and get everybody there. So we would ask that CECs be watching during JF meetings to make sure that their legislator is or is not there, particularly for amendments. I think we talked about it in another slide that we can't leave votes open in for amendments, which is why it's really important that the legislators be there. So the chairs can hold votes open. We can't hold them open on amendments, and we can't hold them open if there are joint meetings, because the committees need to make sure that they are acting in concurrence.
So during the summer, the Appropriations Committee and the Human Services Committee have had a lot of joint meetings, public hearings and committee meetings on just different block grants. And those are some examples of where we cannot keep votes open because each committee must act in concurrence with one another. So if your member is on both committees, for example, it's just vital to make sure they're on the Zoom on during the time that the role is being taken. And because if they miss one and then they vote on the other, they can't go back and vote on the other one. So it's just really important that they are aware of, what's going on.
So amendments, again, the most important thing about amendments, we can't hold votes open. It's one and done. Any member of the committee can offer an amendment, can. The best practice would be to work with LCO, give your chair a heads up, and probably give that drafted amendment to your clerk so we can pass it out to the committee. Friendly amendments are an option. We don't always love them. Again, just be in communication with your chair on how they should proceed with an amendment. And they're treated the same way as a bill, essentially. They require a motion in a second and they require a roll call vote. Sure. So amendments are something that occur live in committee, whereas S language is something that's right. It occurs prior to the committee meeting. You'll have a copy of that. I guess it is a form of an amendment. It just happens in a more formal way. It's not given on the fly in a committee meeting. You have knowledge prior to it. And yeah. So referred bills, again, this could be a change of reference that happens before a committee's deadline, or a committee can be referred a bill after the deadline. And they're treated a little bit differently in these ways. Before the JF deadline, we don't have to do anything with this bill. We may say we don't like it. It may not end up on an agenda. After a deadline, the committee has to meet on it within a certain time frame, whether it's the third regular session day, but not later than 7 calendar days after the referral. After the deadline, it just has to be on an agenda, but we don't have to do anything about it. So it's really important if there's a referred bill that you really care about, that you're in communication with the chairs of the receiving committee to make sure to see if they're going to take action on it. If a bill has a fiscal note, it needs to be referred to appropriations. If the bill refers to criminal penalties, it needs to be referred to judiciary. And if it refers to anything related to revenue, taxation, it needs to be referred to finance. And this is us. So this is our emails and our phone numbers. So if you guys have any questions, need to get a hold of us, please reach out. We're happy to help, happy to answer questions.
Sorry, based on the training we had before, I'm just thinking it's a really good practice for maybe our members with their outreach coordinator to put together a little 101 of the hybrid testimonial guide, which I know Chandra has, or somebody has already done, right? Somebody's already done that. But just because we've lived into this hybrid mode, we're trying to get more and more of the public to testify and track bills that they feel passionate about. But we can't do too much of that 101 guide that we can hand out at our public events or our constituent engagement things that we're doing out in the community, because like you said, there's way too many people that are still using somebody else's link or do not understand promote to panelist or that kind of thing.
Yeah, so we'll share our screen with you right now. Something for this exists on the CJA website. We'll see if Chandra's going to pull it up so we can. So right on the CJA website at the bottom, you'll see testifying in a public hearing. We're trying to share it. Stand by. We're almost there. There we go. So this can be accessed right through the homepage of the CJA website. It'll bring you to this and kind of walk you through the process of how to sign up and what to do.
That's great. I'm just wondering if and I love the little graphics, if we can print that out for our less than digital natives that are older.
Yeah, absolutely. Either your CEC could definitely do that, or your outreach coordinator if you require it or would like to present it for an event. Yeah, absolutely. That can be done.
Great. Thanks.
I just wanted to know how you got there. It says your voice matters. When they go on to the CGA website, right, from that page, where do I send them?
So you scroll down.
Yep, you scroll down and it'll be under Citizens Guide, which is right under the calendar. And then under Citizen Information, it's testifying at a public hearing.
All right, thank you so much.